Denis Napthine was first elected to state parliament back in 1988 as the member for Portland. A minister in the Kennett government, he had the unenviable job of stepping into Jeff's shoes as the Liberal leader after the 1999 election. It did indeed to prove, a character-forming experience for Denis. He was rolled as leader just months before the 2002 election by Robert Doyle. Not that it made any difference to the Liberal Party's prospects at that poll. Denis found himself back in cabinet after the Liberals' 2010 election victory, and then, of course, on the 6th of March 2013, after downing that now celebrated bowl of Special K that morning, he took over from Ted Baillieu, becoming Victoria's 47th Premier, on his 61st birthday, no less. As we all know as well, it has been a particularly volatile period in state politics ever since, with that other Jeff casting a very long shadow over Parliament and the Napthine government grappling with all sorts of political and economic challenges. Denis Napthine will make headlines either way on Saturday night and Sunday morning, either as the Premier who presided over Victoria's first single-term government in 60 years, or as a Liberal Party hero who defied the polls and swept the government back into office. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very big welcome to the Premier of Victoria, Denis Napthine.
Thank you very much, Michael, for that very, very warm welcome. But I also acknowledge Laurie Oakes and the representatives from Kilvington Grammar and Mark Baker, the CEO of the Melbourne Press Club. As we're aware today, it is the White Ribbon Day, and I'm proud to be an ambassador for White Ribbon Day, and I urge all Victorians, especially Victorian men, to stand up against violence, and particularly against violence against women. And we need to be very, very clear in our saying no to violence and dealing with family violence in our community. It's a pleasure to be at the Press Club, which is an absolute institution for over 40 years here in Melbourne, and the Press Club continues to provide an opportunity for lively debate and discussion, and on the eve of a state election, it's a good chance to see the Press Club in action as they continue to report on the upcoming election and report without fear or favour, and make appropriate commentaries that help guide the opinions of Victorians as they cast their all-important vote on Saturday. My aim as Premier of this state is something that has driven me for over 20 years in politics. I'm absolutely passionate about this great state. I'm passionate about the community in which I live and the broader Victorian community. I want to make sure that Victoria is the #1 state in the best country in the world. And this requires both heart and head to work together. You need to have the heart, to have the passion for everything that's Victorian and all Victorian families. You need to have the compassion for those who are disadvantaged and those who need your compassion and your helping hand. But at the same time, you need the head to make sure your decisions are sound and logical, to make sure you manage the economy well, because only through managing the economy well do you have the wherewithal to deliver on your passion and compassion. But what we're about is using the best of our heart and our head to make sure we build a better, stronger Victoria. For my children, the representatives of Kilvington Grammar, the representatives of the next generation, the representatives of the generation that will take Victoria well into the Asian century as we move through the decades ahead. This is a critical election. It is an election about the future of this great state. There's no doubt when you change government, you change the direction of the state. So this election will be about whether Victoria will continue to be a strong, stable economy with a AAA rating, whether Victoria continues on its path of the biggest modernisation plan in Victoria's history, modernisation of our schools and hospitals, modernisation of our public transport modernisation of our transport and other infrastructure. It's a real election about whether we wanted to deliver a stronger, safer, more secure Victoria, where we invest in infrastructure that reduces congestions, improves public transport and improves services to a growing population. We have to make the right decisions and we have to be informed to make those right decisions. So right from the outset, let me express the concern of many Victorians that they aren't being given the full and frank information on which they can make their informed voting decision. Because Daniel Andrews and the Labor Party are simply refusing to submit their raft of policies for scrutiny by the Department of Treasury and Finance, and they're simply refusing to tell the community where the money's coming from. And that is extremely disappointing, considering over 300,000 Victorians have already voted. When Daniel Andrews stood in front of the cameras and said that he would tell Victorians where the money's coming from before they cast their vote. And already nearly 250,000 of Victorians have voted when they don't know where the money's coming from. And we already know that with regard to at least one of his policies, he's grossly undercosted that policy. And that's because both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party have promised to extend the heavy rail from South Morang to Mernda. And we have had that costed by the Department of Treasury and Finance at $700 million. We know that Labor has said they will do that same job for somewhere about $400 to $600 million. So we know from the costings of our policies that is a significant undercosting of the delivery of that project. So either Daniel Andrews is conning the people of Victoria or he has grossly undercosted that project. But we are also concerned that we now have from Daniel Andrews over $33 billion worth of promises that haven't been properly costed, and he hasn't reported to Victorians where the money's coming from. So we certainly have grave concerns about that. And just to put it in context, that $33 billion in promises is 3 times the promises made by the Labor Party in the 2010 election. And in a context of a challenging economic environment, there are very real questions about how Mr Andrews and Labor are going to fund this reckless spending spree. And when we read the paper this morning, we see that he may be also responsible for having to find another $1 billion for tearing up the East-West Link contract. All of those issues are fundamental to being honest and upfront with the people of Victoria. If you're going to make promises, you must have them costed independently, and you must be honest with the people of Victoria about where the money's coming from. And clearly, Mr Andrews has failed that test. And when people are going to vote this weekend, they need to know that they're making a choice between a coalition government which has a track record of good financial management, a track record of managing projects, and the fact that the Labor Party is the same old people, the same old Labor Party that delivered us Diesel, Mikey and the North-South Pipeline. And in fact, if you're looking for a contrast, a simple contrast between the coalition and the previous Labor government, you don't have to look much further than your water bills from July this year. And I have a copy here of a water bill from South East Water for a family in Frankston. And the difference in this water bill, because it highlights that in this water bill there is a fair water bill saving. That is a program implemented by the coalition government that delivers $100 per household saving on water bills for every family in Victoria. Every family in Melbourne, every family are getting $100 a year saving and that's contrasted to the additional costs on their water bills under the Labor Party of $1.8 million a day for the D-cell plan. So that really does highlight what is a significant difference between the two parties. But I now want to perhaps talk more about what our government has been doing and what our plans are for the future of this great state. The first and foremost, what I want to say to you is that you can trust a Liberal coalition government to manage the finances and manage the finances well. We came to government when we inherited what was a financial situation where the government had been spending more than it was receiving in revenue each and every year. There was an inherent structural deficit. We have fixed that problem, and in our recent budgets we have demonstrated with our AAA credit rating and with budget surpluses now in each and every year of the forward estimates that we are a government that can deliver a sound economy. We are a government that can manage the economy well. Across Australia, there have been 10 downgrades of credit ratings across states and territories, but the AAA stable credit rating has been reaffirmed time and time again in the coalition government's management of the economy here in Victoria. And this is not by accident, it's by good financial management, good decision making and some tough decisions. And that result in our budget is backed up by good economic data. For example, our food and fibre exports, which are driving into the Asian century, have increased again this year with a 12% increase in food and fibre exports. Our retail trade is up 6.8%, which is well above the national average, again showing confidence in the local community, in the local business sector. Total business investments in Victoria on the most recent data are up 10% compared with a national average of -5%. We've seen nearly 19,000 new jobs created in the last 12 months and 90,000 new jobs created in the 4 years we've been in office. And indeed, in the last 6 weeks, we've announced another 7,500 new jobs. But we see this economic management as about the backbone to drive better services and better opportunities. We know we're a growing population growing at 1.9 to 2% a year, well above the national average of 1.8 and well above New South Wales at 1.5. And when you have a growing population, you need good financial management to deliver the services we need. So in our most recent budget, we were pleased to provide a record $15 billion for health services. And most importantly, we're investing in important capital to rebuild our hospital system, build new hospitals to cater for the growing population. And indeed, with the recent announcements in the lead up to this election, our capital expenditure in health is now over $5.5 billion, the biggest health capital expenditure in Victoria's history, with the Comprehensive Cancer Centre, the Bendigo Hospital and $200 million at Bowen Health. And of course, in this most recent election campaign, we've announced another $500 million at Monash Health for the expansion of the Monash Children's Hospital, the Monash Critical Care Centre and Monash Heart, and of course $83 million at Ballarat, funding for Shepparton, Warrnambool, Northern, Casey, hospitals across the state where we're investing in new infrastructure, additional beds and additional services. But it's not just about investing in those hospitals, it's also about making sure we get the best value for money. And recently I was at the Frankston Hospital where we're investing $81 million in a new emergency department and additional beds. And we've already, in that project, made 10% savings, saving $8 million, which we're able to announce to use that to further expand the operating theatres and upgrade the kitchen at Frankston. At Box Hill Hospital, a $447 million project started by the coalition government and opened recently, well ahead of schedule. We not only delivered what was the original scope of the hospital, but we delivered an additional extra floor from 9 floors to 10 floors, and the number of beds went from 100 extra to 200 extra. So it's about delivering positive outcomes through good management. And of course, the most important thing in its health is making sure we're delivering better services to the people of Victoria. And I'm pleased to say that the elective surgery waiting list in Victoria now is 11,000 fewer than when we came to government. So we're investing in health infrastructure, we're investing in health services and getting better health outcomes. Education obviously is vital for the future of our community, and in the 2015 financial year we'll be investing a record $9.2 billion in education across Victoria. And we announced over the next 4 years we'll provide another $5.4 billion in education, $1.2 billion for capital and $4.2 billion for additional growth in recurrent expenditure in education. Plus we're implementing a range of what I believe are innovative programs that will make a real difference to our young people. A program to introduce first aid education for all Year 9 students. So all our Year 9 students will be fully trained and get a full first aid certificate. We believe that's a great opportunity for them to grow and develop and become adults in our community through their contribution as qualified first aiders. It also skills them and equips them better for employment prospects in part-time employment or full-time employment as they go forward. We're also introducing 3D printers to every government secondary school right across the state. And we know that 3D printers are about 21st century learning, 21st century technology. And when I went to Ballerine College and saw a small 3D printer being used there by Year 11 and 12 students, designing their own gears and printing those gears with their 3D printer to drive their new soccer robots that they were using in soccer robot competitions, you could see the light in the eyes of those young people. You could see the enthusiasm and the passion in those young people. And we want to excite young people in maths and sciences and engineering, in the arts, in all of those areas. And 3D printers provides that opportunity. And at the other end of the scale, we have made a commitment to make sure all our primary school students right across our system will have access to primary welfare officers, to make sure those students get the best opportunity in the early years to be embrace education, to have the proper family support to get the best outcome in education. In a sense of making our community safer, we certainly are very proud of the fact that we've delivered on our commitment for additional police in this term of government. 1,900 additional police and 950 PSOs on our railway stations. And if we're re-elected, we want to further expand the police force across this state. So if we're re-elected, there'll be an additional 700 officers on the front line, on the streets, in the neighbourhoods, in our communities, making our communities safer. But we're also introducing 250 new specialists in our police force. These are the people who will help deal with the crimes of the 21st century. The e-fraud, the e-crime that is emerging in our industry, the forensic accountants, the DNA specialists, the scientists, the people who will make a difference in those areas of crime where the police need specialist assistance. And we'll certainly be recruiting those, as well as PSOs in a flying squad to deal with antisocial behaviour and major events. And I'm also proud and pleased as a person who has got a great interest in areas of disability that we will not only continue the rollout of the NDIA, the NDIS across Victoria, but we will make sure that we have the funding to deliver the outcomes for people with disabilities across Victoria. And in the area of family violence, today I'm pleased that we've made a commitment for an additional $150 million to boost family violence services, doubling our family violence services across the state, both in terms of education and prevention, assistance for victims of family violence, and of course on the law and order side to make us deal properly with perpetrators and make sure they feel the full force of the law. This morning I was out at a station in Burwood, and one of the reasons I was out at that station in Burwood was to announce an expansion of the car park at the station of Burwood, but also to introduce CCTV camera and lighting. But one of the reasons we need to expand the car park at the Burwood station, and we're certainly doing it at stations right across our system, is because in Victoria, in Melbourne, we've got a significant increase in people participating and using public transport services. There are 10,000 more tram, train and bus services each and every week under a coalition government. And we as a government are absolutely committed to growing public transport. We want more people using more services more often, and we want to make sure they're more reliable and safer. And with our PSOs on the station, we're seeing safety increase. We're seeing more women and young people using public transport after hours, and we're certainly seeing a significant increase in our service system. So that's why in our policy launch we made a real commitment to further boost our rolling stock to cater for this growth in demand in public transport. And this is the biggest investment in rolling stock in Victoria's history. And I can summarise it as like this, that from July next year, every month for the next 10 years, there'll be a new train put on the system in Victoria. A new train every month for the next 10 years. We're also buying 75 new trams and 24 new rail cars for our V-line services. And a significant portion of those have already been allocated to construction companies in Ballarat and Bombardier at Dandenong, creating local jobs, local content, and creating a centre of excellence for building rail, tram and rail car services. We know that when you've got a growing population, you need to invest in infrastructure to cater for that growing population. One of the things we're very proud of in Melbourne is that we are the most livable city in the world, and we have been for a number of years. And you can only retain that livability if you've got a growing population, if you're prepared to invest in the infrastructure we need to allow people to move around, to cater for the needs of people, and to make sure there are business efficiencies and we don't get clogged down with congestion and inability to move around. And so we make no bones about wanting to invest in infrastructure and opportunities. And indeed, if we look at the previous government, that is the area that they failed Victorians and failed them badly. And indeed, Daniel Andrews said at the Press Club on the 16th of October 2012, and I quote, "I've said right from the moment I got this job that we, in many respects, failed to keep pace with demand, with growth." So Daniel Andrews himself said the biggest failure of the Labor government was the failure to invest in infrastructure to keep pace with population demand. And I put it to you very clearly, in the election promises they have made this year, despite the volume of those promises, they have still failed to address the key infrastructure needs of a growing population. Whereas our government has a track record of investing in those and an ambitious plan for the future. We're building the regional rail link. We're building the Melbourne rail link. We're building the airport rail link that we've waited for 40 years. We're upgrading the busiest rail line on our system, the Pakenham-Cranbourne rail corridor. We're upgrading the Bayside or Frankston rail line. We're removing 40 level crossings, and indeed we've already removed 18 level crossings in 4 years compared to the previous government's removing 8 in 11 years. So while some people talk about things, we get on and remove those level crossings. And I'm particularly pleased that the most dangerous level crossing in Victoria, in Labor heartland, the main road level crossing at St Albans, is now out for expressions of interest to be removed under a coalition government after being ignored by the Labor government for 11 years. We're building the Murray Basin Rail project This is a rail standardisation in Western Victoria that will make a real difference in movement of goods in Western Victoria. We're building the East-West Link. We've signed the contract for stage 1 and we will build stage 2 with that vital second river crossing, which is absolutely essential for the western suburbs, for Wyndham, for Ballarat and for Geelong. When you go to Geelong, you talk to people in Geelong, they say their clearest priority in terms of infrastructure is building that second river crossing, because they are sick and tired of getting up in the morning and getting stuck in traffic at Werribee, Laverton and all the way through to get across the Westgate Bridge. We're widening the Tullamarine Freeway so you can get from the city to the airport in 16 to 20 minutes faster, even in peak hour. And in regional rural Victoria, we're duplicating highways on Princes Highway, East and West, and the Western Highway. These projects are essential for a growing city. They're about reducing congestion, boosting transport productivity and efficiency, and creating thousands upon thousands of jobs to drive the jobs into the 21st century. And indeed, on the East-West Link Stage 1, we've made a commitment for local content of over 90%, which will drive jobs, not just direct construction jobs, but jobs in the supply of the steel, the electrical conduit, the electrical cabling, the reinforcing concrete. And absolutely, the East-West Link is absolutely essential for Melbourne and Victoria. It was originally conceived by Sir Rod Eddington in 2008, and for the Labor Party under Daniel Andrews to turn his back on the recommendations of Sir Rod Eddington and to threaten to tear up that contract is reckless and irresponsible in the absolute extreme. And especially when Daniel Andrews and Labor have no solution, no plans, no infrastructure agenda to solve congestion in Melbourne and Victoria, to cater for the population growth. They have no solutions whatsoever. The only proposal they've put forward is the Metro Rail Tunnel, and they have no funding and no timeline for building that. And our analysis clearly shows that project would only deliver an extra 19,000 people moved per peak hour, compared to 35,000 for the Melbourne Rail Link project that is our project. And the real problem with the Metro Rail Tunnel is it would require Swanston Street in Melbourne to be dug up for 3 to 5 years in a cut and fill tunnel. It would be absolutely devastating for the City of Melbourne and the economy of Victoria. So clearly, Mr Andrews has no solution for our growing population, no solution for our infrastructure, and no funding and no timeline for any infrastructure improvements. These projects help drive our jobs agenda. Our jobs agenda, these projects will create 30 to 35,000 jobs and add to the 200,000 jobs that we will create over the next 5 years, the 60,000 apprenticeships and the 850,000 training places. And to build on that, we have the Asian Century, which we've actively engaged with to make sure that we take advantage of the growth in China, in India, North Asia and Southeast Asia and Indonesia to really grow jobs and opportunities in this state. I just want to conclude on what we're doing in terms of reducing the cost of living, the cost of doing business for Victorians. And indeed, people again have a real difference between Labor and the Coalition. When you have a coalition who manages the economy well, you're able to deliver genuine cost of living savings to Victorian families. For example, $100 off water bills. For example, in 1st of January next year, if you live in Zone 2, you'll be able to travel across into Zone 1 for a Zone 1 fare, saving a daily commuter $1,200 a year. You'll be able to have free CBD trams in the CBD and Docklands. And if you're a family with young children, you'll have a $100 rebate on your kinder fee. And we've introduced a fairer, more equitable fire services levy, which is cheaper for most households and most businesses. We're able to also deliver in the past and again this year reductions in payroll tax and work cover to create business opportunities across the state. So clearly, ladies and gentlemen, this Saturday, people in Victoria have a real choice between a coalition government that has a proven track record of sound economic management, a proven track record of delivery of quality services in health, education, public transport, community safety, a clear track record of making sure that we're investing in the infrastructure for now and into the decades to come, a clear track record of making sure that our families are looked after with adjustments for cost of living. Our businesses are encouraged and developed, both in terms of their opportunities locally into the Asian century and to reduce the costs of doing business at every opportunity, versus a Labor Party which has no clear plan for the economy of this state, a Labor Party which has failed to outline an infrastructure agenda for the growing population, a Labor Party which is beholden to the CFMEU and the unions, a Labor Party that is prepared to do a deal with the Greens, a Labor Party that has no clear plan for the future of this great city and this great state. So clearly, this weekend is a clear choice between going forward in a positive way with a coalition government with a positive track record, a positive plan for the future to build a better, stronger Victoria, and our Labor opponents who want to take us backwards. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Premier, for that speech. We have about 20 minutes now for questions to Denis Napthine. You'll see Kate roaming around with some handheld microphones. Preference to working journalists first. Yeah, James Campbell.
I just said working journalists.
You can make that.
Premier, you pointed out that Labor has yet to submit any Treasury costings to Treasury, policies to costing to Treasury. Can you just clarify for us how many of your policies you submitted to the Treasury before 2010?
We've now submitted 98 policies to a Treasury costing. The Greens have submitted 12, the Sex Party have submitted 1, Labor has submitted none.
And how many did you submit before the 2010 election?
Well, let me make it very clear. We put forward a Parliamentary Budgets Office.
10, 9, 8?
Parliamentary Budgets Office proposal to the Parliament of Victoria, and Labor voted against it.
So that would be zero?
We wanted an independent Parliamentary Budget Office to examine all of these matters, and Labor Party voted against it. So that's zero? We've submitted 98 for Treasury pot costings. Yeah. How many did you submit last time? Well, we put 98 before Treasury and Finance.
Thank you, Premier. Gay Alcorn from Guardian Australia. I'd like to ask you to what extent do you think the federal government is cruelling your chances on Saturday? And I refer to 3 issues. One is, do you support or not support the ABC cuts that have recently been announced by your federal colleagues? 2, do you support or not support fee deregulation of universities, which will obviously impact Victorian families and students? And 3, do you agree with your counterpart in WA that Australia needs to do a lot more on climate change? Do you think it's an economic issue that whoever is the next government needs to deal with in Victoria? Or do you think that, you know, as Tony Abbott says, that we're doing enough, direct action is enough on climate change? Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much for the question. Firstly, let me say Saturday and this week, where people are doing pre-polls, is a Victorian election, and I believe the Victorian people are very smart and intelligent voters, and I'm sure they'll vote on Victorian issues. Now, with regard to a number of issues you've raised there, let me try and work backwards. We put in a proposal where we strongly support the renewable energy target of 20%. We have a strong policy in developing alternate energy. In the time that we've been in government, the percentage of electricity generated in Victoria from alternative energy has gone from 7% to 12%. The amount of energy produced by rooftop solar has gone up by 300%. So we have a very active program to encourage alternate energy. And indeed, in my own electorate, we've announced that if I'm re-elected or our government's re-elected, we'll help fund the reopening of a geothermal bore in Portland, which was closed under the previous Labor government, which we believe is a very good piece of alternate energy and a good way to encourage the look at geothermal energy. So now the other, with regard to the ABC, can I say that we want to see more ABC in Melbourne and Victoria. I think the ABC in recent years has been more like the Sydney Broadcasting Company rather than the ABC. And we want to see more devolution to Melbourne and Victoria with regard to the ABC. And I can't, what was the third one you raised? Universities. Universities, there has been issues regarding universities. We want to make sure education is affordable for all Victorians.
Premier, there's been a lot of support in the community for the idea of a Great Forests National Park, partly to protect the Leadbeater's possum, and you know you'd be aware the naturalist David Attenborough came out the other day and said we should have this park. So, simple question: would you consider this idea if you win on Saturday? And more broadly, why do you think it is that the environment's been such a minor part of this election campaign? Will the Coalition have a comprehensive environmental package to announce before Saturday?
Josh, I don't agree with you that the environment has been a minor issue in this election. It's been a very, very important issue, and we've been certainly out there with a number of significant environmental reforms. And in particular, I'll point to our Port Phillip Bay policy. One of the great environmental attractions of Melbourne and Victoria is our beautiful Port Phillip Bay, and we led the way with a promise to remove commercial fish netting from Port Phillip Bay to improve the environment of Port Phillip Bay, building on the work done by the previous Coalition government in the 90s when scallop dredging was taken out of Port Phillip Bay, which has a massive effect on the environment of that area. We've certainly been very proactive in terms of our funding and support for land care, for coast care, for improving the quality of the Yarra River. I talked briefly in the answer to the previous question in our support for alternate energy. And I also point to a release that we put out about 2 weeks ago, I don't think it ran in the Age, where we announced over $45 million for further work to fence off rivers throughout regional and rural Victoria, to keep stock away from rivers, to improve the quality of our waterways. And I'm very proud of the work that we're doing on the ground, both in land care, coast care, dealing with environmental weeds and feral plants and animals. And finally, can I say, I think one of the other greatest changes, improvements we've made in terms of environmental outcomes is our work following the Black Saturdays bushfire Royal Commission recommendations in fuel reduction burning. The biggest killer of native animals, the biggest killer of native flora and fauna has been our mega fires in some of our large fires in East Gippsland, Central Highlands. And if we can actually reduce the damage of mega fires, we have an enormously positive environmental outcome. So with regard to Leadbeater's possum, specifically, we had a Leadbeater's possum task force with experts from across a range of areas, and they made a number of recommendations to us that are being implemented to protect the Leadbeater's possum, which is our wonderful native national emblem here in Victoria. Well, we'll always consider these matters, but at the moment we're implementing the recommendations of the task force.
Anne Lester, Church of Scientology, Public Affairs. I'm a mother and a grandmother, and I wanted to talk to you actually about the drug problem that we have in Victoria. Now, I thought that I did very well. I educated my 3 girls and they've grown up. We've not had a problem with drugs whatsoever. But now my concern is that when they're out there on the road, they're actually unsafe. Like, it's taken the control out of my hands. The ambulance have reported, I recently read in The Age, that call-out rates have gone up to 43% from 17% to 43%, and drug use itself has gone up from 17 to 88% and 200% in rural areas. Now, there's a lot of talk about money that goes into drugs in regard to fighting the scene or handling the scene. My interest is, and our church's interest is in what will your government do about actually prevention? We talk about how to handle it at the other end, how to rehabilitate, but what are your thoughts on actual prevention, educating children?
Thank you very much for the question, and you're absolutely right about the need to take a comprehensive approach to dealing with drugs in our community. And certainly there's been concerns in the community, and quite rightly, with regard to the increase in use of ice in our community, particularly in a number of our regional cities and towns. But we also need to understand we still have ongoing problems with alcohol and ongoing problems with prescription drugs. So across the board there are challenges in all of those areas. We certainly have increased significantly our funding into dealing with drugs and alcohol in our community and have taken a comprehensive approach. There are significant inputs into increasing education and prevention methods, and whether that be advertising, whether that be within schools, whether that be in community groups. One of the areas we've worked hard in is in sporting groups and social groups. So we use peers as educators and using those sporting and social groups to create an environment where we question why people would want to put themselves at risk by using drugs. And that has been enormously effective, and we've used, particularly in our ICE packages, funding specifically at local community levels where local communities can run things that certainly are about prevention education. We certainly have additional resources gone into helping those affected by drugs, so the people who are the victims of drugs, so that we make sure we can provide opportunities for those people to recover and be rehabilitated. And at the other end of the scale, with additional police resources, we've also put in sniffer dogs, particularly a number of new sniffer dogs right across the state, including regional towns. For the first time have now got sniffer dogs, so that we can actually better detect the drug traffickers, the drug pushers, the drug labs. And the number of drug labs we're detecting has gone up enormously through additional policing, and we've got specialist frontline drug task forces to deal with that. We've increased to the number of cars on the road that are now not just doing blood alcohol tests, but doing drug tests when they pull drivers over on the road. So we're certainly increasing our policing efforts through having additional police available, and some of those experts that I talked about that we'll recruit in the next term of government are specifically about recruiting chemists and other people who are specialists in dealing with drugs. And just a small thing that is of interest is that we do monitoring of wastewater and sewerage, and by monitoring that, we can actually test and trace back to suburb streets and even houses or factories where we're picking up traces of drug chemicals that are associated with the manufacture of drug, to assist us to identify drug labs and deal with those drug labs. So we've taken a very comprehensive approach on that issue.
Chip.
Hi, Premier. Chip the Grand from the Australian newspaper. And please don't take this question as a personal critique, but can you tell me, where has the charisma gone in Victorian politics?
Where has the charisma gone? It's here. I think that if people see us out and about, there's a fair bit of charisma there. I think on Saturday, I was managing a horse that was rearing in the mounted yard at the Ballarat Cup. We've been out and about doing a number of things that people may see as charisma, but in the broader sense, and I would ask you to look in a mirror, because I think one of the reasons why there is perhaps a lack of charisma or a lack of fun in politics is because of the coverage. People who make an off-the-cuff remark or people who make an off-the-cuff joke are often reported and taken out of context and sort of ridiculed for it. And then, as a result of that, people learn very quickly to constrain themselves. And I had an interesting experience. People know that my son Tom, who's in his early 20s, just graduated as a secondary primary school teacher, was out with me recently at a school, and we're doing with some year 9 maths doing probabilities, and we're working out the probabilities of people being supporters of various football teams. And he made an off-the-cuff comment about the probability, if you're in Collingwood supporter, that you may encounter some challenging legal issues in the future. And that became the quote of the day in The Age and became somewhat a subject of a bit of a commentary and ridicule. So my son learns very quickly from that to bite his tongue. Don't make, you know, the year 9 kids all laugh. They thought it was fun. But he learns from that those sort of things are often taken out of context and rather than treated with the levity it was expressed, perhaps taken a bit more seriously. And I think you need to perhaps look in your own backyard as to why there's perhaps less charisma in politics.
Yes, one of the students.
Hi, I'm Tom Brooks from Kilvington. Just a question, as a voter, almost 2 months away from voting, quite often, as we see as a young person on social media platforms and TV mostly nowadays, is just the negativity of what you were almost talking about before of both sides. That the main capture we get is the 6 seconds of each side almost nearly taking pot shots at each other. How would you respond to that? And give me and other peers about my age a bit of almost hope in both sides of each party.
And again, you know, I can ask the other people in the room here, because we don't decide what goes on television. The people in this room make that decision, not the politicians. We'd be more than happy if there was greater coverage of the issues and the debates, but we don't make that decision. We don't make the decision of what's in page 3, 4 and 5 of the newspaper or what's on the 30 or 90 seconds on the news. That's a decision of the people in this room, and they might be able to help you with that answer. But one thing I will say to you is that one of the great things about our modern society and modern forms of communication, there is a raft of other ways people can get their information these days. So if a person's appetite is alerted or piqued by what's on the news about a particular issue, there is plenty of ways now to get behind that and get information from a raft of searches of policy websites, of debates on Hansard, of a range of other ways that people can equip themselves and inform themselves about the issues. And I believe that having a broader platform of media and available information gives people that opportunity. But it is one of the dilemmas of politics, and I just know even in the time that I've been in state politics, if you looked at the state political content of the half-hour news slots, I think it's probably decreased by about 50% in the last 10 years. So, I mean, I understand the challenge our broadcasters and our journalists have of trying to capture the essence of a discussion or a debate or an issue in 30 seconds or 25 seconds. It is really challenging.
Can I just speak, and I'll take those comments about journalism on board, Premier. There's been only one debate in this campaign, and it was on pay TV, so therefore you and Daniel Andrews were reaching a pretty small audience. Do you think that has shortchanged voters? And secondly, this Friday night is a night when many undecided voters will decide whether it's you or Daniel Andrews. Daniel Andrews is appearing live on 7:30 Victoria. A spot has been offered to you. Will you take that to get your message across to Victorians?
Thank you very much for that. With regard to the debate, there was a date chosen for the debate. I was available and Daniel Andrews refused to participate on that day. With regard to 7:30 on Friday night, I'll have some consideration of that. People will know that I actually live in 400 kilometres away or 350 kilometres away. That's my electorate where I've got to be on Saturday morning when the election's on. So it's more challenging for me to appear live on 7:30 on Friday night. But I'd be happy to look at what opportunities there are for me to appear and still be in my community on voting day.
Premier, it's been a tumultuous 4 years in the Victorian Parliament for a variety of reasons, and I recall you once saying that your term as Premier had not been easy. With that in mind, is there anything that you regret or anything that you wish you had done differently in the last 18 or 20 months?
Within the last 18 or 20 months, no, I can't think of anything that I wish I would have done differently. Ever since I was elected as Premier, I've been going flat out in the best interests of Victoria. I think our budget in 2013 was a good budget. I think our budget this year was the best budget I've seen in Victoria's history. And I think it does certainly set an agenda of responsible economic management, of delivering better and higher quality services, and having the wherewithal to invest in the biggest infrastructure program in Victoria's history, whether it be 21st century schools and hospitals, whether it be public transport infrastructure and road infrastructure. We are doing more now than I've seen in my 25 plus years in Victorian politics and Victorian history. This is a government that is certainly managing the economy well in challenging circumstances and delivering for all Victorians.
We've got time for perhaps one or two more quick questions. Yes, sir, down the back. There's a microphone coming.
Premier, there seems to be a gap between budget plans and what is actually achieved by any government. Would you like to comment?
Under our government, what are in budget plans are achieved. What are in election promises in 2010 have been delivered. So our government, I believe, have delivered on its promises and delivering on its budget commitments. We've outlined, for example, we outlined in May 2013 when we brought down the budget, we outlined a schedule to develop the East-West Link Stage 1 and sign the contracts in the back half of this year. And we have done exactly that. We continue to deliver on our budget promises. The Box Hill Hospital was announced and delivered ahead of schedule. The Regional Rail Link, a project that was off the rails under the previous government, is now not only on the rails, it is $900 million under budget and delivering above the scope, and was last year awarded the Australian Infrastructure Project of the Year. Our government has an enormous track record of delivering on its promises, of delivering on projects and delivering those efficiently and effectively on behalf of the Victorian people.
Yeah, last question to Brett.
Premier Brett McLeod from Channel 9. This will be the second election we've gone to as Victorian voters where the Premier is not the person who was Premier at the start of the parliamentary period. Do you think voters mark you down for changing leaders midstream?
I think it depends on the circumstances in which that happens. In the circumstances that applies here is that there was not a coup in that sense. There was Ted Baillieu who stepped down of his own volition. Ted and I are close friends and colleagues, absolutely close friends and colleagues. It's not like a Rudd-Gillard scenario when there was you know, backstabbing and numbers being counted left, right and centre. This was a smooth transition that Ted Baillieu decided that he wanted to step down. He felt that he'd lost the support of the team, and there was a smooth transition to myself as leader. So there was not blood on the floor, there was not factionalism, there was not backstabbing. It was a very, very smooth transition, which is quite different to what we've seen in Canberra in recent times.
That's where we'll have to leave it there. Or last chance, Laurie? No.